Hey, it's Craig here from Trendy Money. Today we're going to be talking about a household brand, Johnson & Johnson. If the name makes you think about baby powder, you're not the only one. Although Johnson's baby powder has become quite controversial because a lot of women have filed a lawsuit against it, claiming that using the powder can cause ovarian cancer, the company has defended that the product is perfectly safe to use, but because of these rising complaints, Johnson & Johnson has decided that starting May the 2020, they won't be selling the product in North America. This is quite a big deal because the product has been in grocery stores since 1894, but the decision might not have any negative effect on the company. Since Johnson & Johnson is a very large company, you might be surprised that they are more than just baby powder. The company is so huge that they are one of the 30 companies comprising the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Being a part of this exclusive list says a lot about their size and stability. Valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, Johnson & Johnson has been on the stock market since 1944. Moreover, based on revenue, they are on number 35 on the Fortune 500 list. This also means that they are slightly ahead of State Farm Insurance, Target and IBM. And that ranking has been the same for the past couple of decades. Now at $82 billion, Johnson & Johnson also had a couple of declining years, but they generally have an increasing trend. What's more remarkable is that their dividend has been constantly increasing for the past 57 years. Good news for shareholders. This is probably because they earn well over $10 billion every year. Are you now convinced about how huge this company is? Yet there's still so much to talk about. Not to exaggerate, but Johnson & Johnson is one of the most innovative and important companies ever. Since its creation in the 1800s, it has made a huge impact in the medical industry, and now it continues to invent or acquire other successful brands that we're all familiar with. Now, before we proceed to that section, I just wanted to quickly mention just how scary it was to treat war wounds back in the Civil War. The medical community didn't quite understand back then the dangerous infections that can develop from wounds. Hence, they usually just amputated the patient's limb to prevent it. However, these also pose some problems because the procedure itself can cause a deadly infection. During that time though, scientists like Louis Pasteur and Joseph Lister were able to figure out that germs were causing these infections, and they were serious advocates of sterile surgery. Lister's method of sterilization was basically spraying everything with carbolic acid, which apparently was not the best idea but did reduce the number of infections. These things might be so obvious to us, but these ideas were quite new and bizarre to the medical community back then. Now, going back to Johnson & Johnson. Despite having only two Johnsons in the name, there are actually three Johnson brothers: James Wood Johnson, Robert Wood Johnson, and Edward Mead Johnson. The famous logo we've all come to know was based on James Wood's signature. However, Robert was more central to the company's creation. James and Edward were involved in the Civil War back then. Robert was left behind because he was only 16 years old, which led him to be involved in his relative's pharmacy business in New York. A decade later, him and his partner built a company that produced medical patches that would deliver medicine to your body through your skin. And soon after, his two brothers joined the business in 1876. A few years later, Robert attended a lecture by the famous Joseph Lister, wherein Lister talked about his controversial sterile surgery ideas. Robert left the lecture feeling convinced. After a decade, when the sterile surgery idea gradually received acceptance, Robert and his two brothers started Johnson & Johnson, which was the first ever company to mass produce antiseptic surgical supplies. It's quite scary to imagine what doctors were doing back then, before these products existed. Imagine a doctor using cotton directly from the fields to treat wounds, or even used unsterile sewing kits to close them up, or reusing a sponge on another patient. During their early years, they would produce the sterilised versions of all medical supplies. As the medical community began accepting the importance of these products, the company continued to grow because they were the only ones selling these products on a large scale. Moreover, in 1888 they sold the first ever first aid kit, which was primarily used for railroad workers who were working in the middle of nowhere. Also, during that year, they were able to publish modern methods of antiseptic wound treatment, which later on became the standard for treating wounds and performing surgery. Imagine how many lives were saved because of these. They also grew to create new medical products, such as the maternity kit, since babies were usually born at home back then, and so this product was meant to have all the things needed for childbirth. Another revolutionary product was the Band-Aid, which was released in 1921 as a way for people to treat their own cuts and small wounds. Their employee, Earl Dixon, was the one who invented this product because his wife would usually cut herself while cooking. The company saw the potential for this product and introduced it to the world. The brand has become a household name that even if we're buying the same product, we still call it Band-Aid. Some other famous brands they have is Tylenol, an aspirin-free painkiller, which they acquired by buying McNeil Laboratories. The drug was actually only available with a prescription back then, but soon became available over the counter a year after they bought them. Going forward to 1989, they started a joint venture with another pharmaceutical company, which led to the birth of Pepside and Mylanta. And in 2011, they finally bought the entire company. Going back to 1991, they bought Clean and Clear. Then in 1994, they bought Neutrogena for $900 million. In 1997, they bought Motrin in exchange for their other brands. In 1999, they bought the skincare business of SC Johnson, which mainly consisted of Aveeno. Again, in 1999, they released a new product called Splenda, which is a no-calorie sweetener. In 2006, they made a big acquisition by buying the consumer health unit of Pfizer for $17 billion. This gave the company control over popular brands such as Benadryl, Listerine, Neosporin, and many more. To visualise how large Johnson & Johnson is, let's quickly mention some of the brands they own: Johnson's Baby Powder, Band-Aids, Tylenol, Pepside, Mylanta, Clean and Clear, Neutrogena, Motrin, Aveeno, Splenda, Benadryl, Sudafed, Bengay, Neosporin, Visine Listerine. And there are still so many other brands they own. Of course, there's Rogaine and Nicorette too. Consisting of more than 100 brands, their consumer sales division represents about $14 billion of their 82 billion sales, which means that this is actually their smallest segment. And their largest segment, which is pharmaceutical sales, comprises almost half of their revenue. Now, the last part we're going to talk about is their medical devices, which represents almost a third of their revenue. These include joint replacements, screw plates, and contact lenses. In 1981, they bought the company Frontier Contact Lenses, and in 1988, they introduced the brand AccuView. Actually, most of the company's biggest acquisitions were medical device businesses. In 1996, they paid $1.8 billion to buy a company that develops treatments for cardiovascular diseases. 2 years later, they bought an orthopedics company for $3.7 billion. In 2001, they bought a company that designs drug delivery methods for $12 billion. In 2011, they bought a medical device making company for $19.7 billion. And just recently, they bought a pharmaceutical company for $30 billion. To put it simply, Johnson & Johnson has been buying bigger and bigger companies, which probably led to its huge growth. The company has come a long way from selling sterilised medical supplies back in the 1800s, when few people cared about it. Although Johnson & Johnson has had its fair share of scandals and issues, it still has brought some positive effects to the community, and I think that deserves attention. What do you think about Johnson & Johnson now? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching.
Last but not least, be a pal and share this video, and we will be eternally grateful. And who knows, maybe we'll send you a freebie one of these days just for helping us out.